There was a scene in Better Call Saul when the cartel leader Don Eladio asked Nacho during a sit-down, "What do you want?" Nacho answered that he never wanted to feel like he needed to constantly look over his shoulder. In other words, he wanted to feel safe and not have to worry about anyone trying to do him harm. Don Eladio, hearing his response, told Nacho half-jokingly that in that case, Nacho was in the wrong line of business. The remark Don Eladio made encapsulated the main factors that make up the world of crime in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul: its capacity for entanglement and its volatility. In his attempt of getting out of a life of crime, Nacho was instead pulled deeper and deeper into it. Don Eladio's point here was that you just never get to feel safe if you're a criminal. There would always be bad blood just waiting for you to let your guard down, or opposition whose best interest is to try and tear you down. The series also depicts a life of crime to be constantly in flux, to be volatile. Things never quite stay the way they are. Today's friend could be tomorrow's enemy. These two factors characterize Nacho's escape attempt from a life of crime. Despite his shrewd thinking and best intentions, in the end it wasn't enough for him to succeed. In this video, we are going to take a look at Nacho, one of the most tragic characters in Better Call Saul, and what his death ultimately amounted to. His character is examined, and a discussion of morality as it relates to crimes and criminals is used as context. While the series never quite specifically explained how Nacho started getting into the world of crime, it isn't hard to formulate a rudimentary guess. We can assume, as he was initially introduced as one of Tuco's friends, that Nacho simply had been mixed up with the wrong crowd since day one. This is further reinforced by what we know of Crazy 8, more specifically, the fact that Nacho and he were childhood friends. In this sense, Nacho was a lot like Jesse. Neither of them went into crime for a specific reason, they simply found themselves becoming one of the players of the game. It is also interesting to note that once in, Nacho did not have any qualms about it. He wasn't bothered by the fact that his line of work was against the law, and wasn't necessarily looking for a way out. He was introduced as a reserved and intelligent criminal. But as we all know, he didn't stay that way. Nacho's desire to quit his life of crime was prompted by a variety of reasons. It all began with his concerns over Tuco. As Mike rightly pointed out, Nacho was making business deals behind Tuco's back. This became a cause for concern as Nacho knew just how volatile and violent Tuco could be. He came to Mike for help, asking him to kill Tuco, while also showing Mike a scar he received from one of their past jobs as further proof of Tuco's unpredictable nature. Mike agreed to help, on the condition that they would be putting Tuco in jail instead. Here, Nacho is further characterized as someone who is only loyal to himself. While he was supposedly one of Tuco's people, he acted on his own and did not care for the well-being of his employer. This was also the point where Nacho started to feel how dangerous it was working with people like Tuco. However, despite being portrayed as cunning and elusive, the rest of the series proved that there was more to Nacho than just that. Dealing with Tuco was one thing, but Nacho truly committed to escaping his current career path when Hector showed up in his vicinity as Tuco's replacement. Hector didn't like the fact that his means of distributing drugs were facilitated by Gus Fring's chicken trucks. He didn't like having to rely on Gus, so he demanded that they use Nacho's dad's upholstery shop. This was simply unacceptable to Nacho, as he didn't want to involve his dad in his criminal business. That was the moment when this became a serious cause of concern for Nacho. It became the thing that kickstarted his desire to be done with the cartel completely. Once again, Nacho formulated a plan to betray his boss. This expands on Nacho's character, developing him further from just a simple criminal. While on the surface it seemed like Nacho was simply untrustworthy and was out for himself, the fact is that he was doing it solely to protect his dad. He realized that being involved in criminal activities might have an impact on individuals outside of himself. Although it didn't necessarily paint Nacho as someone you can trust, it did help to humanize him, as now we knew there was someone precious to him that he was willing to give up everything for. Nacho knew he needed to get rid of Hector, and so he worked with Mike and Daniel to do so. As his failed murder attempt left Hector disabled and unable to speak, Nacho breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he was one step closer to getting out. Unfortunately, this wasn't quite the case. Gus immediately took notice that foul play was taking place. Nacho was then seized and forced to become Gus's inside man, helping him take down the Salamancas. On top of that, Lalo came by to replace Hector. This encapsulates Nacho's struggle in getting out. It didn't matter how many of his bosses he betrayed. A stronger one always came and took their place. Lalo's arrival further complicated Nacho's situation. He was a wild card, someone Nacho knew nothing about. Gus would then tell him to earn his trust, something that was even more risky and difficult to do, as Nacho knew he was going to have to stab Lalo in the back eventually. As Nacho got deeper and deeper into the cartel's entanglement, there was a point where he simply knew that he was not going to make it out alive. Desperate, he made a deal with Mike and Gus to lie to the cartel about who he was working for, as long as his father's safety was guaranteed. This was the defining moment for Nacho's character. His capacity for genuine love and empathy towards his dad painted his story as a shameful tragedy, even if the majority of the things he did as a character were a series of backstabbings. In the grand scheme of things, Nacho was nothing more than a pawn used by multiple sides of the drug war to further their own agendas. He was instrumental in the cartel's operations as well as responsible for keeping Gus's true motives hidden. Nacho's intelligent personality worked both for and against himself. His cunning was the reason he was able to continuously play both sides as a double agent, and yet it also made it harder for him to get out, as his competence constantly drew out unwanted attention from bigger players such as Lalo and Gus. The series originally portrays Nacho as someone having his own agenda, from making deals behind Tuco's back to a succession of betrayals of his own employers. However, he ironically ends up being used by others instead. The main draws of Nacho's character were his dramatic death and his capacity for empathy. Along the way, it became easier and easier to root for him, as he had someone innocent he was actively fighting for. In this sense, it was no different than Jimmy making sacrifices for Kim, or even early seasons Walter putting himself through life-threatening dangers for the sake of his family. On top of that, he was able to go off on his own terms. Nacho's death was a pivotal point in both the plot of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. It brought Gus some much-needed time off the radar of the Salamancas, allowing him to recuperate and formulate a plan of attack. Moreover, it also set Hector off for his eventual payback against Gus. In this sense, Nacho was one of the only few characters that managed to get a last laugh while still being a player in the game. Hector, realizing it was Nacho that put him in the chair, would never be at peace with the thought that he wasn't able to kill Nacho himself. On the other hand, Gus Fring, who merely used Nacho for his own agendas, was also eventually killed because he let his guard down facing the crippled Hector. Putting it this way, Nacho managed to get back at both the Salamancas and Gustavo. One of Mike Ehrmantraut's most famous quotes is about the parallels between crime and morality. Mike believed that being a criminal didn't necessarily make you a bad person, but so did not being a criminal not make you a good one. Nacho was undoubtedly a criminal. However, he wasn't devoid of empathy. Despite having been introduced as a tricky figure, Nacho ultimately put the needs of his dad over his own. It was just a shame that he realized this a little too late. It wasn't until things were in too dire a situation that Nacho decided to try and make things right with his dad. He was then brought along on an intricate game of cat and mouse, forced to fight a war that wasn't his, and even did a great job doing so. Nacho's death symbolized the cruel and impartial nature of the world of crime, and how it slowly took hold of you until it was impossible to get out. Nacho might ultimately have a good heart, but his heart wasn't always in the right place. Although he did have a lot of admirable qualities such as intelligence, bravery, and reliability, if it wasn't for his dad, he might as well have just been another common criminal. When Mike gave Nacho's dad a visit to let him know that his son had passed away, he said there would be justice. But the kind of justice Mike spoke of was never going to bring Nacho back. Nacho might have gone off on his own terms, and he might have died a heroic death. But perhaps that wasn't the point. Perhaps it was as Nacho's dad said in response to hearing of his son's death. Perhaps it didn't matter who killed him or who got revenge on whom, because at the end of the day, all of them, including Nacho, were just a bunch of gangsters anyway.